Hey there, it's Mrs. Scoville, and today we're going to be learning all about photosynthesis, but just the basics. So we have 4 learning objectives for today's lesson. The first is to explain how heterotrophs and autotrophs relate to photosynthesis, to define photosynthesis and the equation that goes with it, identify, not these parts, the parts of the chloroplast, and explain the function of photosynthetic pigments. So starting out, we have just a slight review. Remember, heterotrophs are those organisms that can't use the sun's energy to make food. So these are not going to use photosynthesis. As a reminder, those are things like animals, us, and a lot of microorganisms. So a lot of bacteria are going to be heterotrophs. Again, these do not do photosynthesis. The other category that we had were autotrophs. And these are organisms that are going to use light energy, and really that's just energy from the sun. They are going to do photosynthesis to make their food. And just as a little reminder, auto means self. So anytime you see auto in something, like automatic, it means it's going to do it itself. So that's going to be our plants. And there are actually some bacteria, or this other little category called protists. There are some pictures of protists here that will do photosynthesis as well. So again, photosynthesis is going to be this process that autotrophs use, but we're going to dive into it more. So the actual name photosynthesis comes from root words, and photo, anytime you photo on something, that means light. So like a photograph, that's a picture from light. Synthesis, anytime you have that, well, synthesis just means putting things together. So photosynthesis literally just means putting things together with light. What we are going to be doing here with photosynthesis is looking at the actual process, and the products of our process are going to be sunlight coming in, it goes into the plant, usually into the leaf, and then you're going to have oxygen and glucose produced. You can see here in the picture we see it as well, carbon dioxide and water are going in, which is, why you have to water your plants. We can put this not only into words but into equation form. So we would say carbon dioxide plus water gives us glucose and oxygen. Well, in chemical formulas, carbon dioxide is CO2, and it takes 6 of them in photosynthesis. Water is H2O, and it takes 12 of them. We also have to have an input of light, so we just say plus light energy or plus the sun. Over here, C6H12O6 is glucose, and then O2 is oxygen, and we have to have 6 of those that are produced. So this is the overall equation for photosynthesis. Again, CO2 and water, so carbon dioxide and water are the input or reactants, and then the output or products are glucose and oxygen. And remember, glucose is a sugar because we know it has the OSE on the end. Okay, so in last lesson we learned all about ATP and how that's used to store short-term energy. But I do want to tell you guys a little bit about how photosynthesis and ATP relate to each other. So photosynthesis actually produces ATP, but there's no what's called net gain of ATP. There's no overall gain of ATP for the plant, because all of that ATP that is made during photosynthesis is then used to make the glucose, which is C6H12O6. Again, that's just glucose. And just this is kind of an interesting fact. It actually takes 18 ATP molecules to make 1 glucose molecule. So every little tiny bit of the glucose molecule, all that sugar, it takes 18 ATPs for every single one. Photosynthesis, you may know this, you may not. It takes place inside the plant cells in the chloroplast, so that's a little bit of a flashback. Remember, that's going to be where our plants will actually make their energy. It's in the chloroplast. And usually this is going to not just be in the chloroplast of a plant cell, but usually in the leaves of the plant. So most of photosynthesis is going to take place in the leaves. And remember, when we did that little lab with Eladia, there are a ton of chloroplasts in the actual cell. So this is our little cartoon with the little chloroplasts, but they are going to have a lot. All right, so now we're going to dive into the structure of the chloroplast, and we've got a lot of terms here, so I do want to warn you. So on the chloroplast, and this is just a cartoon of a chloroplast, the whole outside of it actually has 2 membranes. So just to indicate which one is which, the one that's most outside is the outer membrane, and the one that's a little bit more in is the inner membrane. So that's kind of easy to remember, 2 membranes, outer and then inner. Obviously the inner is closer into the chloroplast. When you look inside too, you're going to see all these things that look like little towers of pancakes pretty much. All the little pancakes or little discs have a special term, a special vocabulary name, which is a thylakoid. Okay, so thylakoid. All of those little thylakoids are going to be stacked up, and those are going to, the little tower is called a granum, or if there's a bunch of them, it's a grana. The or just being singular and plural. Oh, and I left off, there's a lumen inside. The thylakoid is just a space. So if you see something about lumen, that's just the space inside the thylakoid. So again, a lot of terms. So we have our inner and outer membrane to inner membrane. All the little discs are thylakoids. Inside the thylakoid, there's a space called a lumen. And then all the thylakoids are stacked up into a granum. Again, that's the singular. When we have more than one, it's grana. The other thing here that you might notice is it almost looks like there's these little bridges, or if we use our pancake analogy, it's like the syrup is running through. And these are called lamella. It's just a little bridge that actually connects the grana, and this allows fluid to run between the lumen. The final term that we have here is what looks like empty space inside the chloroplast. All this white area is actually filled with a fluid, and that fluid is called the stroma. So again, we have all these terms, and you guys do have to know what they mean. All right, so when you look at a plant, you usually look at it and it's green. So we need to talk a little bit about chlorophyll, because chlorophyll is what is making the plant look green. And this is because chlorophyll is it's a chemical. Really, it's a pigment. That's a special name for a pigment. That's a chemical that absorbs light. So there are actually two types of chlorophyll in plants, and they're just named easily chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. The reason that the plant has the two different versions of chlorophyll is when that light hits the leaf, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B are going to absorb light at certain wavelengths. And if we look here, chlorophyll A is mainly absorbing in the red range, whereas chlorophyll B can absorb kind of in the violet range. If you notice here in the middle, green, it's a wavelength of about 550, and it's not actually absorbed. So what happens is it's absorbing the reds, the violets, the blues, and it's reflecting the green. Because it's reflected, plants actually look green, because that's what's not being absorbed into the plant. So chlorophyll, again, is our main pigment that's actually absorbing the light energy for the plant to use to do photosynthesis. You may have noticed, though, in the fall, we have really beautiful colors on plants, and they're not green anymore if you look at the leaves. That's because in addition to chlorophyll A and B, some plants have additional pigments. One example of this is what's called a carotenoid, that actually give more of a range of light that can be absorbed, just making all of photosynthesis more efficient because they can absorb more light. And if we look, you can see a very clear example of how the carotenoids are absorbing wavelengths of light that chlorophyll A and B do not. So again, this is just something that extends what's called the range, so the overall distance of wavelengths that can be absorbed, and this makes photosynthesis more efficient. And we can see if a plant is doing this in the fall very easily, because all those beautiful colors that you see, like on these maple leaves, the beautiful oranges and yellows and reds, are the carotenoid pigment being kind of exposed when the chlorophyll dies. So again, all these oranges and reds, those are the carotenoids that the plant is using to make photosynthesis more efficient. Okay, so we have just one other thing, and that's a little song about photosynthesis, so just a little quick review. But again, do remember you have to know all those terms for the for the chloroplast, including chlorophyll that's inside. All right, so here's our photosynthesis song. Well, maybe. There we go.
If you want to know how a plant grows, it takes water, air, and sunlight, and makes cellulose. Every plant can do this fundamental process, and we can call this photosynthesis. Unlike me and you, plants need CO2, and they make oxygen that stops us turning blue. Every plant can do this fundamental process, and we can call this photosynthesis. It's a miracle how all the chlorophyll captures sunlight in the leaves of the plants and the trees. A plant of any size can do it if it tries, but we're not green, so we can't photosynthesize. Every plant can do this fundamental process, and we can call this photosynthesis. It's a miracle how all the chlorophyll captures sunlight in the leaves of the plants and the trees. Every plant can do this fundamental process, and we can call this photosynthesis.
Okay, so with that, we are at our summary. I do want to tell you quickly, in that song, he said you make cellulose. They showed the structure of that. All the glucoses together make cellulose. So really, you're still making glucose. With this, though, go ahead and write your complete summary of your lesson, and make sure you complete the practice question.